Welcome to Double Fries No Slaw. TJ Pittenger, Richie Barnes here with you. Our show presented by Guthrie is brought to you by BetUS. We'll give some love to Roback and Garnet and Gold here in a little bit. But Richie, an exciting week. We were both in Tallahassee yesterday for Coach Ham's last game, so that was fun. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. How's your weekend been?
Good. Like you said, in Tallahassee, this time change messed me up a little bit this morning, apparently. Just had a great time in Tallahassee, but like you said, we'll talk about that later. Just very, very happy. And then the official news just dropped about what's going on with the basketball program, which I'm very excited about as well.
Yeah, and Florida State got some good news earlier in the week too on the ACC front, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Coach Storms had some good points in a recent press conference he did, so I want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll wrap up. Maybe not a super long show, but we're coming at you a little bit later than we normally do. But we appreciate all those tuned in, and let's get after it. Double Fries No Slaw brought to you by Guthrie's in Tallahassee. You can visit both their locations at 188, or all three of their locations, 1818 West Tennessee Street, 2550 North Monroe, and 2870 Appalachia Parkway. I was up there last night, Richie, driving home, and you guys went to Bowden's, and I kind of was like, I had a free coupon for like a free box, which I don't usually use. Like they sent me some to like give out to, listeners and different people, and I don't really use the free ones much because I'm like, they already do enough for us. But I was like, do I want the free box? Do I not? I passed on it. I didn't get it. I had some food at the game, and I wasn't like really hungry, and I also just didn't want to eat greasy chicken like before a 4-hour drive home. But I was like this close. Like I got on Tennessee Street and I got in the left-hand turn lane to make a U-turn to go back to Guthrie's, and then I passed on. I was like, maybe not my best decision. So I stopped at a gas station and got a Diet Dr. Pepper and kept rolling. But anyway, shout out Guthrie's and appreciate them for their support. Let's talk a little bit about probably the biggest news that we've been kind of looking forward to. Won't rehash the whole thing because we've talked about it a ton, but Florida State obviously gets a massive win against the ACC, Clemson as well. Very, very high overview and not getting real deep into this because I want to take it a different angle, but Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Miami, whomever kind of at the top of the conference has a really good opportunity to make more money from the conference based on both success initiatives and initiatives set up by just basically TV eyeballs, a 5-year weighted average of your last 5 seasons. That's really good for Florida State because even last year when they went 2-10, they were still 4th in the ACC in total viewership. And then over the 5-year span, they are number 1, right? And so that is not going to include 2021, but it will include 22, 23, 24, 25, and then now it'll include 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 this upcoming season. And so if the Noles can take care of business, they'll have some big matchups. You think about Alabama coming to town, Miami coming to town. They play Florida. They play at Clemson. They should do pretty well viewership-wise if they can make a bowl or do better than that. So some good news for Florida State there without a doubt. That's a huge win. They'll make more money in the short term. They'll also, Richie, be able to probably get out of the conference around that 2030 time frame when the buyout drops down to $75 million from the 572 or 571 or 574, whatever the number was, $500 million when they were in court arguing it. So a big win for Florida State. We will all agree on that. Here's my question for you. And I tweeted this and got some mixed responses to it. I think this puts a lot of pressure on Mike Norvell because I think the only reason he's still employed at Florida State, and I like Mike, I know you saw him yesterday at the game. Like, this is not anti-Mike Norvell speak. I want him to work out here at Florida State long term. But I think the only reason he's still employed is because of his buyout. I think $65 million is the only way you survive 2-10 at Florida State University. I just saw North Carolina State just got rid of their basketball coach the year after he took them to the Final Four. So don't tell me that the year after Florida State finished number 5, they couldn't have gotten rid of their coach for going 2-10 as well. So I'm just telling you, I think that this puts more pressure on Norvell because Florida State is going to have an opportunity to make anywhere from $15 to $20 million more per year. And if they have another sub 500 year, all of a sudden the money for that buyout is available. You're getting that from the ACC, and the Wakes and BCs and Syracuses and those other programs in the country or in the conference are paying for that. But, and I know Florida State doesn't want to spend the extra money they're getting on a buyout, but another bad year, I think that money just all of a sudden becomes available, and it's basically coming from the ACC. So I don't know. I don't know if you agree with that, disagree with that, whatever. Not that there already wasn't a ton of pressure on Norvell, but I think this puts more pressure on him because I don't think there's going to be a problem of, oh man, we can't find the money next year. I think they know that the money's coming in if they take care of business, and or if they, even if they have another poor year, they're still going to be in the top 2 or 3 for a 5-year rolling, and they're going to make a lot of extra money this year.
Yeah, you talk about Mike Norvell was a huge benefactor of a unfortunate chain of events for Florida State, starting with Alabama getting into the college football playoff over Florida State, and then Nick Saban retiring, because I think Norvell still gets an extension and a nice raise, but not to the level he got with that opening job at Alabama, where he was, according to Alabama's own athletic director, one of the top 2 candidates that they had in mind. So I think Mike Norvell definitely benefits from that. But yeah, with this, it's great news for Florida State. And honestly, it would have been great if we had just fought this whole thing out and just won that lawsuit outright and could have jumped to the SEC or Big Ten. But now, it gives you a couple years to kind of find your way. And 2029, 2030 sounds a heck of a lot better than 2036, which is what it initially was for Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, whoever it may be. And it sounded almost like, this is ESPN and the ACC saying, we just want to hold this conference together for a few more years as we plan for the future of what college football might look like. But I do think it does put a lot of pressure on Mike Norvell because, to your point, I'm shocked any coach could survive 2-10, but that buyout was just ridiculous, especially when you have all this money tied up in lawsuits and you're potentially looking to, pay the, grant of rights fee to get out of the conference. It just financially did not make sense. If it wasn't for the money, the financial aspect, I don't think Mike Norvell's the head coach right now. To your point, we both want him to succeed. He's an awesome guy. I got to chat with him a little bit last night at Ham's last game. And I think he can turn this thing around. I think he made some extreme changes on his staff that was very much necessary. And if that works out for him, this could be quite the redemption story for Mike Norvell. But Mike, man, don't come out and go 5-7 now, because that becomes an issue at that point.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that today, and we've talked a lot about the schedule and what our expectations are this year, and when I really think about it, I think about the fact that Vegas has set your win total at 7.5, right? And the juice is on the under, right? So they're kind of saying it's more likely that you win 7 games than 8 games, but you're supposed, and last year we were supposed to win 9 or 10, right? So they're not always right? But they don't usually miss a couple of years in a row on a team. They balance that out pretty well. And so when I think about it, I think, okay, well, I think 6-6 probably saves his job, right? But 7-5 certainly does, and then 8-4. I think at 8-4 you'd be pretty happy. No, it's Florida State. You're not happy with 8-4, but I think you'd be like, all right, well, yeah, we understand the. If I offered you right now 8-4 before we even play games, I mean, most people would say like, yeah, I'll take that. Like after last year, I'll take it. But if you were to somehow win 6 or less, I mean, you're pretty significantly underachieving at that point, right? Like you're talking. I mean, there's 4 games that I think Florida State is absolutely going to be an underdog in, barring something really crazy happening. They're going to be an underdog against Alabama. They're going to be an underdog against Clemson. I'd say it's probably pretty likely they're an underdog when Miami comes to town. Now, Miami gets blown out by Notre Dame, gets blown out by Florida. Florida State beats Alabama. Yeah, that scenario could lead to Florida State being favored in that early season matchup. I'm not predicting any of those 3 things. I think Miami probably splits with Notre Dame and Florida. We probably lose a bit, so most likely Miami's going to be favored. And then at the very end of the year, is there a chance that Florida's, 3-8 and we're,
no,
7-4? I'm just saying, like the scenario for you to have to be favored at Florida would be you'd have to have like 2 or more wins than them. So you'd have to be going into the swamp with 7 or 8 wins, and they've got like 5 or 6. In that scenario, yeah, maybe you would be favored at Florida. I don't think either one of those things happen, though. I don't think you're going to the swamp with 8 wins. I don't think they're coming to that game with 5, right? And so Yeah, so I think you're an underdog in 4 games. You might be an underdog on the road at Raleigh. And then really, I don't know that you're an underdog in another game. Maybe at UVA. I think you're probably a slight favorite at UVA unless Bama just absolutely beats your brains in. But I think you're a slight favorite at UVA. I think you're a slight favorite at Stanford. And then I think you're a favorite in all the home games. Unless, again, Virginia Tech, like that's late in the year. If the wheels have really fallen off, then things might change by then. But, you can't be losing games that you're supposed to win is what it comes down to at the end of the day. Like, you need to take care of business. And if they only win 5 or 6, then Florida State hasn't taken care of business, right? And so, yeah, I think that puts a lot more pressure on him because the safety net of the buyout, to me, this is my opinion. I don't know how Michael Alfred's going to spend money, but the safety net of the buyout seems to be somewhat gone with the additional money that Florida State should make this year. Even if they go 2-10 again, they're going to be top 5 in views. I'm just telling you that right now. Like, that might be a screwed up system, but if they go 2-10 this year, they're still going to be top 5 in eyeballs in the ACC. That's just 1, how big the brand is. 2, people like to hate watch. And 3, the rest of the ACC sucks that bad, right? Miami will have better viewers. Clemson will have better viewers, but they'll still be top 4 or so. So I don't know. I think it's more pressure on him for sure.
Yeah. So I haven't looked at Miami's schedule, but I'm not confident they're going to have better viewership. Florida State, that Alabama game is going to have ridiculous viewership. I saw they announced it'll be a 8:30 kickoff at night, which, is exciting. But for me, I'm not excited about it, but I'll still make it work.
It's a Saturday night, man. Come on.
I know. Trust me. But yeah, no, I think that, and kind of what you said, though, is part of the biggest problem from Norvell, and one of his biggest challenges is he will most likely be an underdog to the 3 teams on the schedule. Well, really the 4 teams on the schedule that Florida State fans care the most about, when Bama, Clemson, Miami, and UF. You cannot go 0-4 in that stretch. If you win the other 8, but you lose those 4 games, people are not going to be excited about that season. Even though we're talking about 8 wins, hey, that'd be great after a 2-win season. But 8-4, losing to those 4 teams, that'd just be a bummer of a season. Like, okay, who did you beat? And you'd look at the schedule and say, no, we didn't beat anybody. But hey, we did win 8 games. I think it definitely saves his job for another year. But at the same time, of those 4 games that just mentioned, ideally you'd love to see him split it, but win just one of those games. You got to find a way to it. He does not have the fan support that he used to have after 13-0. But that happens when you go 2-10. So sure. I do think there's a lot of pressure on him. But yeah, those 4 games, if you go 0-4 in those, his seat gets extremely hot. I'll say that.
Well, I think if you go 0-4 in those, the caveat to that might be to play devil's advocate. Like, those could be 4 really good teams, right? Miami's expectations this year are going to be to make the playoffs. Clemson's the ACC favorite. Bama's got odds to, top 12 odds to make the playoffs. And Florida is, I think, one of the better teams that's going to go 7-5. I think they have a lot of talent on their team, and you're playing that game in the Swamp. So I'll say this. If you went 8-4 and lost those 4 games, but you just look competitive, right? You didn't look competitive against any good teams you played this year. If you just take that step of looking competitive, you lose a 7-point game to Miami, who goes on to the playoff. You lose a 10-point game to Bama, who goes on to the playoff. You lose a 14-point game to Clemson, who wins the ACC and is a top 4 seed. I don't know that, that doesn't upset me too much. Now, at the end of the day, conceding rivalries and all your big games before the season even starts, sucks. I get that. But if you look more competitive, I think that's a big deal for Florida State this year. On Miami, I do. Now, if Florida State goes 2-10, Miami will beat them in viewership again this year, right? But if Florida State can hold their own and win 7 or 8 games, then yeah, I think they'll have higher viewership for sure. Miami's schedule, though, they do play Notre Dame on a standalone game, a Sunday night, so at home.
Yeah.
So they're gonna pull in a massive number for that. Notre Dame, Catholics, convicts in Miami, so that's a home game for them. It counts for the ACC stuff. That's gonna pull similar to what Florida State LSU did. That's going to be a massive number because it's a standalone game. They also play on the road at SMU. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in that. Obviously, they play Florida State. We both split that one. And they play Louisville as well, which I think will be a big one for them. So I think their games will do pretty well. And it's kind of the thing where if Miami's winning, I think people tune in. Their fan base is very fickle. And so they tune in more when they're winning. And if they're winning, more people hate watch them. I'll be the first to admit I watched every single Miami game this year because I hate watched them. So I think when they're winning, people also like to hate watch them. When they're losing and they're 5-5, people are just like,
No
their
one
season's already
cares.
over. Who
Yeah.
cares? So I do think it's one of those brands that people kind of like how when the SEC's in the national championship, you may hate the SEC, but you might watch it because you want to see it. So we'll see. I mean, at the end of the day, if they show the strides that we think they can this year, then I think he'll be fine. But I think the money's going to be there if they do have to make some unfortunate decisions. So let me give BetUS a little bit of love, and then we'll move on from there. But BetUS, make sure you're betting with them. If you're betting on any college basketball coming up, listen, they've got college baseball in there too. Florida State, one of the last two teams in the country that is undefeated at this point. They take on the Gators on Tuesday, and then Tennessee, the other undefeated team in the country, takes on the Gators this weekend. So it'd be cool if both teams continue to be undefeated into next week. But BetUS, YouTube 150 for 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your next two, all of that up to $2,000. We appreciate BetUS for their support. Richie, I'll let you start this one off just because I know it means a little more to you, but I'll try and provide some perspective and some thoughts on this as well. But we were both in Tallahassee last night for Coach Ham's last game. A really cool win for the Seminoles, which to me was not most important, but really important. I did not want to see them lose. They were an underdog. I mean, shout out the team. I mean, I know they're not great. I know they've not had the season anybody would have wanted. I'd say they probably met expectations, though. Like, I don't know what the expectations for this team truly were. So I'd say they probably, you can kind of opine on that more. But I was really glad as an underdog, they found a way to win last night in a game they really led the whole way. Like, SMU fought back and took the lead a couple of times. But, man, once they took the lead around the 20s, like they kind of not dominated, but they always had that, 4 to 6 to 8 point lead. And they ended up winning it, 76 to 69. A really fun game to see Florida State come out on top. And it reminds me, it's very different, but I was at Kobe's last game. The Lakers were terrible that year. I don't think they won 20 games, but they won the last game of Kobe's career. And it just made the crescendo a little bit better, a little sweeter than having lost. Can you imagine doing those post-game interviews and stuff if they had lost, both Kobe and Coach Ham? So I thought that was cool that they won, and just a really cool night to be in Tallahassee for sure.
Yeah, very special night. Honestly, a really good atmosphere. It stinks that the students were on spring break, so the student section was basically empty. But still, the people that were there all wanted to be there and were there for a reason, myself included. And I just did not. I was going to be there to celebrate Coach Ham regardless. I know these last few years have not been great, but what he did at Florida State was truly tremendous. We were a cellar dweller. And we had about a 10-year stretch where we were a top 4 team in the ACC almost every single year. Brought Florida State our first ACC championship in the postseason. And my favorite in 2020 when he won the ACC championship outright, because I think winning the regular season conference title in college basketball means way more than just getting hot for 3 or 4 games in March. That was really special. Seeing so many former players, got to catch up with a lot of former players that I've had the pleasure of meeting in the past. Derwin Kitchens was there in his game jersey. Is a little snug on him now. So Derwin, if you're listening, just saying. John Kreft had his jersey on. Got to catch up with Isaiah Swan, who was a player my freshman year back in 2006. And I got to go to the game with my wife and then 3 people who I met in college, literally in the Knoll Zone, back when the Knoll Zone had the sidelines. I'm not going to say anything. Some changes might come into the Knoll Zone. But yeah, it was just a special night. And I love that every single media timeout, they had a former player or a former assistant provide a video message to Coach Ham. If you know Coach Ham, he did not want that night to be all about him, but it absolutely had to be. The only disappointing thing to me was I really was hoping that they were going to name the court after him. But it was awesome. After the game, they had a big ceremony. I was lucky enough to be able to get down on the court and get a picture with Coach Ham in his last game. But yeah, to your point, TJ, the game, I'll say this much. It never felt like the outcome was truly in doubt. Yeah, it was a close game throughout, but it's not like we're down 12 points with 10 minutes left in the second half. They kind of controlled the whole game. And I will say those players were fighting for Ham. They played as hard as you could imagine. and it was evident from where we were sitting in the stands. And I'm just so happy that he got to go out on a high note. He made a comment that, some teams after the game, he made a comment to the whole arena that, sometimes one, two, three, four teams just get hot in March. They go on a run, and they make the tournament, and that you never know what can happen. I'm not sitting here telling you Florida State's going to win a national title. They probably will not make the or the NCAA tournament. They'd probably have to win the ACC tournament just to get there. But just to see that he still has that fight in him, at least for another 3 or 4 weeks, it was awesome. And like I said, he's meant so much to me as a Florida State basketball fan. You mentioned I probably care about Florida State basketball more than most Florida State casual fans. And he has been the coach basically my entire fandom of Florida State.
Yeah, no, same. What did he get there in 2003? So I remember a little bit of FSU hoops before that, but growing up, like Al Thornton was kind of like the first, my introduction. Al Thornton and Tony Douglas and those guys like that, mid 2000s. We weren't great, but they were fun to watch. Man, those guys could take over some games, and he obviously he was there for all of that, right? And then the times where they were really bad, post those guys, Von Wafer, those are probably my top 3 players ever.
Tim Pickett.
Yeah. Oh, Pickett's up there too. Yeah, that's probably my top 4. If I'm telling you, Pickett, Von Wafer. Yeah, not really the recent guys. And I love Snare. Luke, obviously the coach, talk about him for just a sec. But, I liked, the 2012 team was obviously way up there. And then Bacon and Beasley and Isaac and the guys that they've had recently are way, way up there, XRM. But, man, yeah, you kind of remember back to the guys you grew up with, right? That's why if you talk with older guys, they like Charlie more than Jameis, right? Because that's who they were watching, right, when it started. So, Pickett, Von Wafer, Tony Douglas, and Al Thornton are my top 2 for sure. But that's my Mount Rushmore of FSU basketball players. I loved those guys. And I remember, we hate Raycom now because everything that's come out with the ACC. But I remember watching them on the local Raycom channels and stuff. You'd watch them on channel 38 or whatever here in Tampa. And those, those were so much fun. And so, yeah, it was cool to see all those guys come back. It was cool to see his teammates come back, all those old white guys. And he's like, yeah, I didn't really look like my teammates back then. He wasn't afraid to call it out and be kind of funny. They had the gospel singer out there singing.
That was amazing.
Yeah, before all that, before he came out and spoke, and it was just such a cool moment. And I know the FSU hoops hasn't really been what Florida State fans would want it to be over these last few years, and there's certainly been a decline since 2020, 2021, that time frame. But it was cool to go out with a nice moment. And like you said, yeah, who do they play? They play Syracuse first, is that right?
Yes. Yep, Syracuse.
Go win that, and they should.
And they blew Syracuse out in the regular season. So yeah. You never know. It's March.
Bad. Go win that. And then the next one is SMU, right? Who you just beat, and I know they'll have a little revenge on their minds for sure. And SMU's had some nice wins this year. So, but you could win 2. And if you win 2, you're in the final 4, right? And I don't think anybody's beaten Duke, but even to win 2 in Charlotte would be kind of all right, well, this feels pretty good.
And I don't know, how fitting was it that it was Andy Enfield on the opposite sideline of Coach Hamilton, a guy who really, when Coach Ham brought him in, I don't know how many people truly remember this. Florida State was one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country. Ham makes an amazing hire in Andy Enfield, and he comes in, and Florida State is top 2 in the country in free throw shooting. He literally turned our shooting completely around. Then everyone obviously remembers him at Dunk City when he's at Florida Gulf Coast. Then he went to USC. It kind of pushed out USC a little bit at SMU now, which is not a bad place to be. But yeah, it was just a lot of full circle moments that just made the night really special.
Yeah. Somewhat helpful that he knows the landscape. He knows what Florida State's, let's be very frank, limitations are with basketball. They're never going to fund a roster that is going to be a top 20 paid roster in college basketball like they do in football. But I think that's a big pro. I think maybe a reservation that I have is he obviously hasn't coached college, right? Like he's coming from the NBA. So I think there's pros and cons to everything, but I think there's some benefit if you were going to go get a guy that didn't have like a crap ton of college experience or anything like that, or, go the G5 route that, Florida did and has found a lot of success with. If you go get a guy that at least understands the culture, understands the limitations, somebody that's probably not going to get poached, even if he does have success, like you're going to be able to keep him in Tally if it works out. There's a lot of benefits to that. So I don't know. I like Luke coming back. I'm certainly not trying to sound anti that or anything like that. I just don't know enough to, oh man, here's what he does from an X's and O's perspective that's really going to make us successful. I don't know that. I'm not going to pretend to know that. Chris Nee or somebody like that's probably a better source to try and pull, pick his brain about it. And I'm sure he's written about it a ton. You can go check out at Knowles 24/7. But what are your thoughts on Luke coming in?
He was in my top 2 of realistic hires, right? It was him and Sam Cassell for me. And that sounds weird because typically I'm not a huge fan of schools hiring former players that played at that school, because if when it doesn't work out, it just gets messy and it's nasty and you don't like that. But I think he has the definite experience needed, obviously a 4-year player at Florida State and, a solid point guard from Florida. And with the NBA experience, obviously NIL is going to play a massive role in building a roster. But who else could we have hired that said, yeah, I've worked with the Warriors and Steph Curry, and I've been with the Sac Kings. Um, you know, his resume is pretty impressive for what he's done. He literally, and he wouldn't do this. He could show up to the introductory press conference with a NBA championship ring on if he wanted to, because he has a couple of those. I think getting someone younger is a really good move. I'm pretty excited. I was told by somebody yesterday that, they would make the announcement official today. But I was told not to say that yesterday. So I had to, after a few beers after the game, not get on Twitter and, try and be source guy. But it was, I was excited. I'm talking to my wife at dinner about Luke. She's like, I don't know who this guy is. I'm like, no, he's awesome. He's awesome. He's, but yeah, I think it's as good of a hire as you could have made. And I'm assuming we got him at a pretty generous price. Not that is the end all be all, but you weren't going to get Dennis Gates, right? You just weren't. What Mizzou can offer to pay and what we can offer to pay is just not even in the same stratosphere. So I'm excited about this hire. I know for a fact Luke cares about the program. I've met him before. Extremely nice guy, very humble, but also very tenacious. And I think he's going to hold his players to the same level that Ham has held his players to, in terms of not just what you do on the court at practice, but what you do off the court. I think that's such an underrated aspect of Coach Hamilton, is you never read about any of his players in the newspaper off the court. I think Luke Laux will definitely keep that same mentality. It'll be a high integrity program. How good will they be? Can they get back to conference championship contenders? I don't know, but I do really like the hire.
Yeah, I almost wonder if in the best case scenario is that Luke is able to build this up into a program of a very solid kind of floor of competing to consistently be a bubble team. And then if he has done that, understanding that unless things just completely go off the rails in 5 or so years, when Florida State, to go back to our first segment, when Florida State's ideally in another conference and can invest more into the program. Because I do think that any program Florida State has, they want to be really successful for. They're always up around the top 20-ish of the Directors Cup. In 5 years, with more resources, could they go to kind of that next level? And I don't think they'll ever truly be at a point where they're competing consistently for national championships or anything like that. But can they get back to the point of, hey, they've been a bubble team a couple of years, they've snuck into the tournament here and there under Luke. Can they, if they get to the SEC or the Big Ten, can they then fight for some Sweet 16s, be a top 5-6 seed, instead of just sneaking in late or playing in the Final Four or the first four or whatever? So that would be like a kind of a realistic best case scenario, is that they improve a little bit upon where they're at this year, win a few more games along the way, build up the floor of the program, have it be kind of a respectable program, go out. And Luke needs to, And he needs to kind of do what some of the other programs, like kind of like softball, have done with fundraising. Like Lonnie does a great job with fundraising for her program specifically, and I think that's something that could make it, a kind of a wait and see thing of, okay, well, 5 years into this thing, we get some new resources and some new life into this program and all programs. Can we consistently kind of compete at a higher level? So
Yeah. Well, there's a another program in the conference who just replaced a long tenured legend with a former point guard. Granted, they have a guy named Cooper Flagg, which is kind of a nice thing to have, and that's worked out really well so far. So maybe we're just following that Duke model and watch out Duke, because Luke's coming.
we're coming for you, Duke. No pressure.
Luke has the best assist in Florida State history when he hit snare in Cameron Indoor for that game winner.
I think the first time that Florida State goes up there will be pretty fun. Maybe we'll have to do a 1-day trip up there for that next year. All right, give Roback some love, and then we'll move on to our last segment.
Yeah, Roback, RHOBACK.com. Use code DFNS20. That's DFNS20 for 20% off your first order. Polos, hoodies, joggers, shorts. They have everything you could imagine. A ton of great Florida State gear, but also a ton of other great gear. If you're a golfer or if you just like comfortable stuff when you're out on the weekends, definitely give them a chance. I promise if you buy from them once, you will buy from them again. I'm wearing the Roback FSU Performance hoodie right now. And it is probably my favorite attire that I have when it comes to performance gear. And I'm just bummed that once it starts getting a little hotter, probably in the next 2 weeks here in Florida, I won't get to wear anymore. But Roback.com, DFNS20 for 20% off your first order.
So let's move on to this. Did you get a chance? You mentioned this, but did you get a chance to watch the Storm's interview? I know you had some good little one-liners that I'll bring up, but did you watch it or no?
So I did not watch it, but I did read the majority of his quotes.
Okay, cool.
From
my three biggest, so I got 3 takeaways. We'll talk about each one of them and then we'll wrap up tonight. But number one of the guys he really mentioned, and a guy that won a turquoise jersey, which you can go back and listen to the interview on how a guy wins that, but essentially they have to have like a perfect day. They have to have a 10 out of 10 day to get a turquoise jersey, and it's kind of a reward for what they've done in tour of duty. One of the guys that they mentioned was Daryl Jackson, and I think there's been a lot of just kind of questions on how much he can really lead that defensive line. And, I think that, James Williams is certainly there. There's other guys on that line if Amari Williams steps up. But the other guys that you can kind of count on as well. Well, I think a lot of Florida State's either success or failure is going to come down to how good Daryl Jackson is. And, last year, a lot of the success, when there was success on the defensive line, came from Josh Farmer. Whether that be clogging up stuff in the middle, which didn't happen a lot because he was double teamed just an absolute ton, but you're seeing how talented he really is now that the combine is happening. But he talked a lot about Daryl Jackson pouring into guys, and you can't just take everything these coaches and strength guys and media, whoever, at face value after a season like 2-10, right? And second of all, what are they going to do? Are they going to be negative about any of these players? No, they're not going to crap on them up there. So you do have to take things with a grain of salt. But I do think it's probably better for Florida State than worse that some of the things he mentioned, like Daryl pouring into guys and Daryl understanding like what Josh just did over the last year, 2 guys that are very big buddies, and him having that mentality, that work mentality that I don't think we heard a lot last year from really anybody on this roster. The guy that puts in the extra effort. There's been a lot of questioning of Daryl Jackson, maybe even somewhat unfairly at times. But I do think that being one of the guys that's being highlighted right now, him being the one to pour into guys and really try and bring his teammates up, obviously has a very bitter taste in his mouth he's been here for 2 years, and his 2 years of being here could not be any different, right? 1 year going 13-0, the next year winning 2 games. I think that's probably a pretty big positive for Florida State. Again, can't read into everything. You can't, oh man, he said Daryl Jackson has a couple of good days. Like we're back, but that's probably my most concerning position group that we've talked about this before. The things that worry us the most going into the season is the defensive line, the depth there, especially a defensive tackle. Daryl Jackson taking a leap, and not only a leap talent-wise and play-wise, but also leadership-wise, because I don't think there were any real leaders on the team last year. I think that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, there's a phrase that people throw around called a money year, right? I think Daryl Jackson thought last year was his money year. And while he performed well for the most part, I thought he was gone. I thought he would just enter the draft prematurely, but he chose to come back, and clearly he's putting in the work, which is so important. But not only is he putting in the work, he's showing that leadership that, quite frankly, the team lacked at a lot of positions last year. And if he's willing to put in the work, when you see the best player on your side of the ball, or even your position group, and they're working harder than everybody else at practice, that makes you say, damn, man, I need to step my game up. And it sounds like that's what's happened in Tour of Duty. I think Daryl Jackson that truly understands this really is now his money year. Uh, he has the frame and body of a guy that could be a 10-year NFL vet. He just needs to put everything together. And I think if he does, he will definitely see the fruits of that labor. And I think that's exactly what he's doing right now. And I'm excited to get the reports and talk to people about what happens in spring practice. I'm sure he'll be somewhat limited because typically your best players, or the players you suspect will be the best on the team the following year, they're fairly limited on spring. That's more so for the younger guys, but no, but I think it's something a good thing to hear that. And we're talking about a guy who was going to transfer to Florida State, then drove back to Miami just to make a last minute decision to say, no, I'm going to stick with my transfer to Florida State, when Miami was trying to steal our entire defensive line. And now it seems like he will be one of the leaders of the team and probably the leader of the defense.
Yeah, no, I think it's a massive positive for Florida State when you're trying to pull positives out. The next one I want to talk about, Thomas Castellanos. I think it's a big deal too. Again, somebody commented, we're not going to know a lot about this team until we really get into it and we really start to see them really in August, right, against Alabama. But the talk about him kind of immersing himself more into the team, ingratiating himself more into the program, I just don't think you really got that with DJ. I think with DJ, it was very much like, hey, if things are going well, like he's well liked, he's a nice guy, but he's a quiet leader. He's certainly not going to push people. I think that's different this year. And I think that I don't really know what Castellanos' play is going to be. I'm not trying to project that at all, but just more leadership on this team seems like a massive win for me, right? Whether or not they better win more than they did last year. I'm not telling you that that's going to, result in 10 wins this season or anything crazy like that. But I do think that just looking at that from a pretty big picture, grand scheme of things, I think that's kind of a big deal that he is very different from DJ in that regard.
Yeah, and again, it's very similar because it's basically another 1-year rental. But at the same time, DJ, I think he was just more mild mannered, and I don't think he did anything wrong. The players all liked him. It seemed like he just didn't have that personality. But we have a very high bar set when you had a guy like Jameis Winston, who was here at Florida State, in terms of leadership and motivating his teammates. But Thomas Castellanos, again, you can lead by example. And I think that's kind of what he's going to be doing. And once he gets more comfortable around these players, around these teammates, I feel pretty good about him. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's a top 3 quarterback in the ACC or anything like that. But I do think he has potential to do a lot of special things, just given that now we have Gus Malzahn, who I would say is a slightly less talented player in Nick Marshall, and got to a national championship game. Now, granted, he had one of the best defensive tackles in the country and one of the best running backs in the country. But at the same time, I do think there's a lot to work with there. And I think he's a guy that players are going to be excited to be around. And again, this is the time. If you've ever played even high school sports, when you do off-season workouts, everybody knows the guys that are going the hardest in the workouts, that are giving it their all every single rep. And everybody also knows the guys that are just, taking time off, saying, oh, I'm going to sit this one out. And, Castellanos is not doing that. He is definitely doing everything he needs to right now in Tour of Duty.
I thought this was pretty interesting too, and this is the last one, my last big takeaway from what Storms had to say. He talked about Norvell and was asked about how he's responded to a season like last year. For those that don't know, I think Storms has been with Norvell for 12 years, is what he mentioned. And I think fans have this idea that, and I would even say that I probably kind of like thought this at times, but after a season like last year, you're thinking like, man, do you just change everything up? Do you just say like, man, scrap it all and start from the beginning? And Storms kind of talked about that. He said like, look, we're not changing the process like that. We're not changing it all the way up. Like he's not just tearing down everything he's ever done that has been really successful. I know that, at the end of the day, he said 5 seasons and 3 of them have been losing seasons, but he did build up from 3 wins to 5 wins to 10 wins to 13 wins. And Storms talked about like, no, we're not just throwing everything away. We had an absolute dud of a year last year, but we are trying to tweak and fix what was wrong. But he said, why would you question what you've built over the 12 years we've been together because you have one bad year, right? And yeah, were 2020 and 2021 disappointing years? Absolutely. But were they building years, right? That built you up to where you got, the next 2 years after that. So I thought that was pretty impressive just to kind of hear like, yeah, there's not really a reason to just scrap everything and start from the bottom and just recreate your entire coaching prowess. It's more of a, hey, let's try and tweak the little things and fix the little things. It's funny to me when you look at these like top 10 coaching lists or top 25 coaching lists. And last year, you see Mike Norvell like in the top 5 of everybody's coaching list. And this year he's not in the top 25. Like he all of a sudden, now I understand how pissed off the fans are. And I'm not trying to like win anybody back over to Mike in a massive way. You have your thoughts on him and that's fine. But it's not like he just forgot how to coach football, right? Like he's been successful at several stops. He's been successful here. It's not just like, now, are there things that I think Mike does a terrible job of and needs to fix, like recruiting and stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not like he just forgot like how to coach football, right? And so I thought Storm's kind of going into that and kind of explaining like, yeah, we're not changing everything. We're going to try and tweak the things we think went wrong with last year and do things a little bit differently with certain players and personalities. But like this is a new team and we're going to try and model what has been successful in the past. So I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not, but that was interesting to me as well.
No, I definitely agree with that. It's funny. With my job, I've been with my company for 14 years now. And my department had a pretty rough January, and my are like, "What's going on? What are you going to do differently?" I'm like, "Nothing. We're going to keep doing exactly what we've been doing for 14 years. That has worked out really well, and things will self-correct." Because I think that's the biggest mistake people make, whether it be in sports or in the corporate world, is you try to do an immediate self-correction when you don't need to. You just have to trust what you're doing. And I know it's cliche, trust the process. But if you are confident in your process, and especially if you've had success in doing it in the past, then why would you change it? Even if there's a blip on the radar, once is a coincidence. So, once is random, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a trend. So yeah, if we have 2 more bad years, that's a trend. Okay, now there's changes that need to be made, and Mike probably won't be here, neither will Storms. But again, once is random. You went from 13-0 to 2-10, and I will never, ever, ever defend 2-10. That is unacceptable at Florida State, no matter what. And I would not have defended Mike if they had fired him for it, because that's how indefensible it is at Florida State. But at the same time, if he comes back and gets to 7, 8, 9 wins, and then the next year we're at 10 wins, okay, it was a blip on the radar. We don't know yet. It's history will teach us what we saw. But yeah, I kind of agree with Storms. Why would you change everything? Now, obviously, you made some changes in coaching personnel, but don't change what you're doing personnel wise. Like you just saw what Jared Verse and Braden Fisk did in their rookie years with their Rams. Like, I mean, it works. So I completely agree with what his comments there.
Yeah, so anybody that wants to watch that again, it's just, you can go check out the Seminoles.com YouTube, Josh Storm's interview from 3 or 4 days ago. I thought it was pretty insightful, pretty good. Kind of give a good insight of like what they actually do during tour of duty, how they kind of specialize things for certain guys, all the bigger, faster, stronger stuff that may interest you here in the middle of March, as we are just waiting for football to get started. So let me give some love real quick to Garnet Gold, garnetgold.com, and then we will wrap up here in just a minute. But if you are shopping for any FSU gear, if you're rolling into town, if you're shopping online, make sure you're doing that with garnetgold.com. Again, the code is NOSLAW, NOSLAW, for 15% off your order. You get free shipping on $75 or more. If you buy like 2 or 3 Nike things, you are certainly over that $75. So if you're local, you can just do an in-store pickup. But if you're going up there, obviously they lose the spring game this year, but make sure that you are shopping at Garnet and Gold and trying to help them out. We appreciate them for their support of not only FSU athletics, but also our channel. Richie, any shout outs before we get out of here?
Coach Ham. That's it. And Michael Alford. It was nice. I saw him on the court after the game as well. He made a very nice comment saying, he appreciates what you and I do for the program. And, I'm like, I'm kind of hard on you guys sometimes. He's like, we need that though. So shout out Michael Alford and more than anyone this week, Coach Ham.
Yeah, if you use yours for Coach Ham, I'll shout. Yeah, I think Peter Collins, President McCullough, Michael Alford, those that continue to fight this battle. I mean, Florida State asked for unequal revenue sharing a little over 2 years ago, and didn't get that. And they fought a pretty good battle and came out with way more than that this week. So massive win for Florida State against the ACC. And if you missed any of our content on that, you can go check out the video with Doug Rohan from Rohan Law. We dropped on Wednesday, I think. So that's here on the channel. Go check it out if you're interested in any of that.
And also Charlie Ward. He was down on the court after the game.
I saw that.
And if you ever met Charlie, he is the most calm, mild-mannered person ever. I was with some of you may follow her, Yvette Abraham on Twitter. She's one of my good friends from way back in college. But she was like, I want a picture with Charlie Ward. I'm like, okay, let me go talk to him real quick. And he's like, sure, I'll take a picture.
Dude, that's awesome. He was actually it's cool too because he's won the Heisman Trophy, played in the NBA, everything else, national championship, and he's fangirl and just holding it. I could see him from where we were sitting, just holding his video camera up or phone or whatever, video and the stuff, just like the rest of us were, which is kind of cool. These guys care about FSU too. So
yeah, he absolutely cares about Florida State.
Yeah, that was really cool to see.
More than anyone could imagine.
So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Double Fries No Slaw, brought to you by Guthrie's. Appreciate Bet US, Garnet and Gold, and Roback for their support as well. We will talk to you guys soon. Go Noles.